Good morning to everyone joining us here today. And thank you so much for taking part in Global FPIES Day and working to expand your knowledge of FPIES. So today what we're going to be talking about is FPIES in daycares and in preschools. This educational presentation brought to you from the FPIES Foundation is mainly geared towards teachers and daycare providers, but of course, everyone has something to learn from these resources, so I'm glad you could all be here with me today, and I hope you learn a lot that you can bring to your daycares and your classrooms. So some of our learning objectives for today are looking at what is FPIES. And we're going to go into a little bit of an overview about the diagnosis and what's really involved. Next, we're going to talk about how to identify a reaction. FPIES is a type of food allergy, so it's really important to know what an FPIES reaction looks like so you can take action in order to help the child who is affected. Next, we're going to talk about how to identify and avoid trigger food risks. And when you think about food allergies, you might be accustomed to hearing the word allergen. In FPIES terminology, we tend to refer to our allergens as trigger foods. And next, we're going to talk about how to create an FPIES safety plan. If you have a child affected by FPIES in your care, it's really important to have that safety plan in place. And there's a couple different elements we're going to go into. One side of the FPIES safety plan is looking at the day-to-day, what you're doing to prevent reactions from happening, what you're doing to ensure the child's safety in the classroom setting. And the other side of the safety plan is looking at what you do in the event that a reaction happens, because, it can happen and you want to be prepared, just as you're going to want to be prepared for any other emergency that might occur in your classroom. So those are the two areas we're really going to examine when we talk about the FPIES safety plan. And finally, we're going to talk about communicating with others about FPIES. Because FPIES is rare, not a lot of people are familiar with FPIES, and we really want to think about the language we use when we're communicating with others about FPIES to give them all the information that they need in a concrete manner, and to keep it simple, but also to make sure that everyone involved in caring for the affected child has a good understanding of what FPIES is and how we keep the affected children safe and happy and healthy in the learning environment. One of the things that accompanies this webinar is a packet of documents to support what you learn here today, but also that you can employ at your school or your daycare as communication tools, as learning tools, and for planning tools, particularly in regards to planning for emergencies. So you'll find that packet on our website. All of the resources that I mentioned throughout this webinar are available at our website for free, but also, feel free to connect with us via our email if there's any hard copies of awareness materials in particular that you would like sent to your facility for staff trainings or just general FPIES awareness. A little bit of background about myself. My name is Amanda LaFew. I'm one of the co-executive directors and co-founders of the FPIES Foundation. My professional background as a board-certified music therapist has offered me unique insights into creating accommodations and adaptations in classroom and in clinical settings for individuals with differing needs. So this has really helped me in my work here at the foundation. My experience as a mom with two amazing daughters who both happen to be diagnosed with FPIES has also allowed for more insight into managing this rare diagnosis in a variety of social and educational settings. Both of my girls are now in elementary school, and we've experienced a lot over the years with learning how to make adaptations and to help them be as developmentally appropriately involved in different activities as they go through their lives. Both are still affected by FPIES, so we want to make sure that they're still able to access, what a child their age would want to do. You can reach me at a.lefew@thefpiesfoundation.org if you have any questions related to this presentation or in regards to any programs that we have to offer at the FPIES Foundation. And again, I thank you for joining me here today, and let's get started. So what is FPIES? FPIES stands for Food Protein-Induced Enterocolitis Syndrome, and this is a rare type of food allergy that affects the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. There are two ways that infants or children with FPIES might come to medical attention. This is through classic or acute reactions or chronic reactions. And in a couple slides, we're going to get a little bit more into detail about what those things are. But before we do, I just want to draw your attention to the lower corner of this slide. We have an example of one of our awareness resources, our Have You Heard card, which is available in Spanish and in English. And this is really a great tool for spreading awareness in a community setting or in a school setting. It just explains FPIES in some really basic common sense language, and on the back of the card it gives some ideas about how people can help to prevent FPIES reactions in affected children, and how we can keep our areas safe for these children. So if you want to request this or any other resources you see on our website, again, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to send things your way. So this next slide, we're looking at just a really basic overview of what FPIES is. It really is not your typical food allergy. When people think of food allergies, they often think of what's referred to as IgE food allergies, and FPIES is kind of a different beast. So when you're looking at reactions with FPIES, again, these are caused by foods. So as you may be familiar with food allergies with IgE reactions. But the reaction pattern and some other aspects are a little bit different. So when you see an FPIES reaction, the hallmark really is a delayed onset, which can be 2 or more hours after the child ingests the trigger food. And symptoms can be relatively dramatic and can include severe and repetitive vomiting and diarrhea that can lead to sepsis-like shock in some cases. So when a child's exhibiting this type of reaction, it's really important to get them immediate medical care. And there is also the chronic reaction pattern that we'll discuss a little bit further, but it's serious and needs to be managed, but it's not as dramatic and emergent as the acute reaction pattern, which I just described. When you're talking about allergens in FPIES world, we tend to refer to them as trigger foods. So there are some foods that are considered more common triggers, like dairy or soy. Rice and oats are actually considered the most common solid food triggers for children who are affected by FPIES, which may seem a little bit strange. A lot of people consider rice to be, not quite as allergenic, but with children who are affected by FPIES, many of them do react to rice. So that's important to keep in mind. The other thing to mention is in terms of trigger foods, just because there are some common triggers, it doesn't mean all children will react to them. A child can have an FPIES reaction to any food. So just as each child is unique in their personality, their lists of trigger foods can also be unique. So that's really a conversation you need to have with the parents and figuring out, what's safe versus what's unsafe. In terms of testing, unfortunately, there are no tests to definitively diagnose FPIES. It's one of those diagnoses that's diagnosed by ruling out other conditions and by looking at the pattern of symptoms that the child has exhibited. So for parents, it can be a long and arduous process finding a diagnosis for their child with FPIES. Because there are no tests that can really, confirm an FPIES diagnosis, many families use what's referred to as food trials for figuring out what foods are safe or unsafe for their children. So the reason I mention food trials, especially to all of you who are listening in today, who are working with our children who are younger, is that these kids' allergen lists can change over time because they're doing these food trials to figure out what is or what isn't safe for them. So when you're having these conversations with family members and you're talking about, what foods are on the child's unsafe list that they have reacted to, please understand that there may be other triggers out there that they haven't tried yet, just as there may be other safe foods out there that the child hasn't tried yet. So when you're thinking about, what is safe or unsafe for your student in your class that's affected by FPIES, I would encourage you to stick with their safe food list. And if a parent has not provided you with one, I'd encourage you to ask for one. Because, like I mentioned, just because a food is not on a child's trigger list doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe for them. So if you do have an accidental exposure happen in your classroom, and it's one of those gray area foods, it's not on the safe list, but it's not on the unsafe list, it's really best to proceed with caution and act as if it were something that could be unsafe, and still contact the parents and reach out just as you would if the child had ingested a known trigger. In terms of treatment, there is no day-to-day treatment for FPIES other than, avoiding those trigger foods and helping to maintain an appropriate diet for the child. When it comes to reactions, a child undergoing an acute reaction needs to be seen by medical professionals generally in an emergency room setting, and those treatments tend to be IV hydration and monitoring. Some children might receive steroids, or they might receive Zofran, again, via that IV. But that's really under the purview of the child's specialist and or the emergency room doctor who's seeing the child at the time of their reaction. So those are some things that you might see. But it is important to note that, with proper medical attention and personalized dietary plan to ensure proper nutrition, children with FPIES really can grow and thrive. You wouldn't be able to necessarily pick out a kid from the classroom who had FPIES just by first glance. Many children see a dietitian to ensure that their nutrition needs are met, and they look at things like supplementing the diet. And that's the other thing I want to mention really quickly is some children and infants who are affected by FPIES may have in their diet something called elemental formula, which is a form of medical nutrition. And if that is the case, then, the parents will give you a little bit more background on that. But it's just something to keep in mind as you're going forward and looking to learn more about FPIES. So let's talk about the differences between FPIES and IgE food allergies. Though FPIES reactions and IgE reactions both do involve the immune system, there are differences in how they present. When you look at an FPIES reaction, the hallmark really is the delayed onset, which is generally 2 or more hours following the ingestion of a food. So what does that mean? Well, if you have a child in your classroom, maybe a young infant, 6 months old, who's eating a bowl of rice cereal, if they eat that bowl of rice cereal at 10 a.m., and if that rice is an FPIES trigger for them, you are not going to see the reaction until around noon or later. That's what a delayed onset reaction looks like. With FPIES reaction, symptoms do involve the GI tract. Acute reactions can require immediate medical attention, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a minute when we're talking about how to identify acute reactions. So turning and looking at IgE reactions, usually the onset is immediate, rarely delayed more than 2 hours. There are rare cases where IgE reactions can be delayed, but typically you're going to start to see the symptoms shortly after the food is ingested. Also with IgE reactions, symptoms may involve multiple body systems. So instead of, with an FPIES reaction, you're just going to see GI symptoms. With an IgE reaction, you may see GI symptoms, but you could also see skin symptoms such as hives or swelling. You might see respiratory symptoms such as shortness of breath. So that's one of the differences between the two. Also, IgE reactions can require immediate medical attention when they become severe. As you may already be familiar with, IgE reactions can sometimes lead to anaphylaxis, so it's really important to have children get the care they need when they start to experience these reactions. And of course, we're talking about FPIES today, so if you would like to have more information about IgE allergies, I encourage you to seek out the website foodallergy.org, which is operated by the nonprofit FARE, F-A-R-E, and they have some great resources and information if you want to explore more information about IgE allergies. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to talk about understanding acute FPIES reactions. FPIES is rare, so it's really important for people to get the education they need in knowing how to identify these reactions, since they may not be really familiar with how they present. So acute FPIES reactions, they can cause severe vomiting and or diarrhea 2 or more hours after ingesting a trigger food. When we talk about this type of vomiting, it's extremely forceful. It can be really profuse in volume. It's very dramatic to witness usually. This, of course, can cause dehydration, and it may progress to shock, which is a life-threatening reaction. So the focus that I'm really going to have for you is on how important it is to have that child receive medical attention very quickly. So as you may have already presumed, when a child is throwing up that much or, they're having diarrhea, this can, of course, lead to dehydration. Dehydration can be seen quickly with an acute FPIES reaction, and it's really important that this be addressed. So when you're looking at symptoms of dehydration, this is a medical condition that occurs when the body loses more fluids than it is taking in. When the blood pressure drops and body systems, they can begin to shut down. There's not enough blood flow and oxygen delivery going on. So you might see sunken eyes, dry, cracked lips, decreased skin elasticity, decreased urination. So in the case of infants or young toddlers, you're going to be seeing less wet diapers. It's really important that you seek medical intervention immediately in order to avoid shock. Progression can be stopped with appropriate treatment. Sometimes you hear people asking, should I look at going to an urgent care as opposed to an ER? Well, oftentimes the urgent care, and it may be different in your area, does not have the ability to, administer IV fluids to children. So really going to the emergency room where they have the resources to help the affected child is very important. Generally when a child is experiencing acute FPIES reaction, they're not able to keep anything, including water, down. Now, if the dehydration is not appropriately addressed, it can progress to what is called compensated shock. And compensated shock is a medical condition that occurs due to the body's attempt to compensate for excessive fluid loss. And just some of the symptoms that you may see in compensated shock are listed here below. You might see extreme thirst, restlessness, and progressive anxiety, weakness, tachycardia, pallor, cool and moist skin, decreased blood pressure. There is a need for emergency medical treatment in order to prevent further progression. This is a very serious condition, and it really needs to be addressed quickly. And again, if compensated shock is not appropriately addressed, it can progress to decompensated shock, which becomes, more serious and even more of a dangerous condition. And decompensated shock can occur when the body's compensation strategies begin to fail, and signs and symptoms of shock can become much more apparent. So the child's pulse can become difficult to detect. They can experience altered states of consciousness, be disoriented or confused. Their skin may be cool and dry and appear gray and ashen, and there can be very rapid drops in blood pressure. Again, this is a life-threatening medical emergency. It is extremely important to seek emergency medical care. And we're going to talk more about this in later slides when we talk about, developing the safety plan for the children that you have affected by FPIES. And of course, we have our caveat at the bottom. This document is not meant to diagnose any kind of medical condition. This is simply meant to be a guide to help you to, know what can happen during an acute reaction and, what you need to do and how you need to get that child to immediate medical care so that the medical professionals can take over and help that child. So the other reaction pattern for FPIES reactions is chronic reactions. These can occur when infants or children are ingesting a problem food as a consistent part of their diet. And when this is happening, they might experience increasingly severe vomiting, diarrhea, and in some children, poor growth, though this is not the case with all children. These symptoms can become serious. They can progress to an illness which mimics a severe total body infection. Each child is unique, and they may experience his or her own range and intensity of symptoms. So it is something to watch for, but to also understand that not every child is going to present identically when it comes to chronic reactions. So just to go back to the top of this slide, when we're talking about ingesting a problem food that's a consistent part of a child's diet, with infants, you might want to think of the example of formula. An infant is having formula as, the main component of their diet on a daily basis. The child could be reacting to the dairy in the formula, or perhaps they're on a soy formula and they could be reacting to the soy in that. That's an example of a potential, food that's a consistent part of a diet. With an older child, you might look at something that they're having daily, maybe they're having several glasses of milk every day or some other food. So that's what we're referring to when we're talking about a consistent part of their daily diet. So let's talk about tracking down triggers. Trigger foods are foods that cause an FPIES reaction to occur. These are specific to the affected child. It's really important to remember that not all children are going to experience the same triggers. In addition, some kids might have one trigger, whereas other children may react to multiple foods. So how can trigger exposures happen? Well, the number one way is through accidental ingestion. A child may reach over and grab the snack of the child next to them and then eat it before you can stop them from ingesting that food. They may pick up a crumb off the floor that they see and put it in their mouth. Those are all examples of accidental ingestions. But trigger exposures can also happen in other ways. They can happen through food residue that's on surfaces. They can happen due to cross-contamination. There can be exposures from arts and crafts materials. An example of this would be, if you have a child in your classroom who is FPIES to wheat and they're at the table playing with Play-Doh, they may put their hand in their mouth, as we know many young children do, and then that can become an ingestion exposure just from that trace amount of wheat that might be on their hands from the Play-Doh. So that's something to really look out for as well. Now, just a little caveat about arts and crafts materials. Unlike food, they are not required to put the ingredients on the packaging for certain arts and crafts materials. So calling the companies that make these materials or speaking to families of the child affected by FPIES about what arts and crafts materials they may know of that are safe for their child or what materials they may know of that are not safe for their child. Families can be a really excellent resource for teachers and staff, so make sure you have those conversations with the parents, and I'm sure that they can give you some great ideas. And then the final area to look at is sensory materials. A lot of daycares or preschools have these really great sensory tables, and they're fun for the kids. They're a great experience, but oftentimes you might find food in these sensory tables. They might be filled with rice or with corn kernels. And if you have a child in your classroom whose FPIES triggers are rice or corn, accidental exposures can occur. Again, the children are playing in the sensory bin with their hands. If the child who is reactive to those foods puts their hand in their mouths, those trace proteins on their hands can actually cause an FPIES reaction if that is one of their trigger foods. So when you're looking at sensory materials, it might be a really good idea to avoid food products and, take a look at some other ways that you can fill those sensory tables. Throughout this presentation, we have some different insights from parents in our FPIES community who wanted to weigh in and give some advice about what they learned worked and didn't work in a daycare or preschool setting. So this mom writes in a great tip to check the floors after meals and snacks. As you guys all know, little kids are messy and they drop things. Her daughter got a hold of a random goldfish cracker on the floor in this way. So the other key that she wants to mention is she was so appreciative of the way that the staff at her daughter's school reached out and contacted her to let her know what was going on. Communication really is key, and it can help the families and the staff to best figure out a way to navigate a difficult situation and find out the best and safe, outcomes for the child involved. So how do we track down these trigger foods? If there are any snacks or meals served at your school or daycare, we want to educate all staff regarding the importance of label reading and what is involved in this process. Before I had my daughters, I knew the basics. I knew how to read labels. I did not understand everything involved. There's, sometimes things are not written clearly on labels. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of detective work. So it's really important to, educate your staff on how to do this. And we actually have some great resources on our website to give you a little guide and know the steps to take to really learn how to read labels accurately. You also want to educate your staff on how cross-contamination can occur and how it can be prevented. Some schools like to do family-style meals, which is a really great concept, but if a staff member, for instance, is cutting the children's food for them and they use the same knife to cut one child's food as they do to cut the child's food who has FPIES, perhaps their FPIES triggers on the other child's plate, cross-contamination can occur from the food proteins that are still on the shared knife that the staff member is using. So this can be a complicated topic to discuss, and really having some resources on hand can make it a lot easier. So on our website, you can find the detailed label reading tutorial, and I gave you the link for that. You can download it. It's also part of the packet of documents that accompanies this webinar. And another great place to learn about food exposure in a classroom setting is allergyhome.com. They have multiple resources about label reading, preventing cross-contact, and so on. And I gave you the link to the specific area talking about the school setting, but they also have several resources throughout their website, like on the foundation website. So that would be a good one to browse through as well. And another note from an FPIES mom, she says, please be mindful of how cross-contamination is a large factor. If you are not confident the area, like play area, or the surface, blanket, bed, toy, cup, or bowl is safe enough to prevent a reaction that could lead her child going to the hospital, then please do not expose her child to it. She says that staff, they are in control to prevent this reaction from happening when she's not there, and she is trusting all of you to keep her child safe. So preventing exposures. Again, communication is key. We want to inform all staff working with children of any known allergens. We also want to use dedicating eating areas for snacks or meals whenever possible. I understand not everybody has a large amount of space, and this might not always be a possibility. When you do need to use shared areas for eating, for crafts, and other table activities, you really want to have a good cleaning routine and regimen in place for wiping down all the surfaces with fresh wet cloths or wipes before and after eating. And again, like was mentioned by that mom a few slides back, really sweep the floor and check and make sure that all the remains of the food have been taken care of before you're going to use that space again for other activities. Again, avoid using food items like rice for the sensory tables. You might want to consider using different sizes of beads, of course, taking into consideration the age and stage of the children in your room. Straw pieces or pom-poms. There are lots of great ideas out there. And again, you want to talk to the parents in your class because they might have some really great ideas to share with you that you may not have thought of before. And like we mentioned before, be aware of the food ingredients and craft items. It's crazy when you do find out some of these foods that can be in craft items. So it's really important to know, again, how to track those down and to have those conversations with parents so you can kind of see what has worked for them in the past and what you could, potentially use in your own classroom. And again, we have another mom weigh in. She says, please, keep all foods separate and labeled per kid. Have children keep their own placemats and know that food stays on their mat with no sharing. Stock up on wipes and make sure everyone washes their hands after eating. She brings up some really great points. Long ago, I worked in a child development center, and the kids in my class were 2-year-olds, so none of them were reading yet. And they were really just learning how to recognize, their names and things. So what we did is we had a different animal image for each child. And that's how they knew what items were theirs. So let's take a look at an FPIES safety plan. One of the things we mentioned earlier is that part of preparing your classroom for a child affected by FPIES is developing the FPIES safety plan. And of course, you're going to want to do this with the child's parents or guardians, either at the time of the child's diagnosis, if they're already in your care when they receive their FPIES diagnoses, or before they come to your school or your center. This is something you're going to sit down and work out with the parents or guardians in advance. So we have two different plans on this slide, and we're going to talk about the one on the left first. So this is a management plan. And with the management plan, we're really looking to delineate, what determines a child's baseline. So essentially, how does the child act? What do they look like when they're not experiencing symptoms? So what is their norm, essentially? That's what the green zone is. The yellow zone is what the child looks like when they're not really feeling well. So, we're not at the point where we're having an emergent reaction or anything like that, but something's not quite right. So this would be the yellow zone. And then the red zone is when it is an emergency, when you would want to seek immediate medical attention. And, this is where the description of what that would look like for this child is going to be written. This is a really clear-cut way for professionals and families just to kind of outline these really simple areas and to know what to do when you start to see these zones come into play. Now, the next document we have is the emergency plan. And you're going to have the emergency action plan in place for a few reasons. Number one, of course, you're going to have it in place for your staff at your facility. So they know what to do in case, one of these children experiences a severe reaction. The other reason you're going to have it in place is because this is the plan that's going to accompany you when you take that child to the emergency room in the event of a reaction. As we mentioned earlier, FPIES is rare, so you may go to the emergency room and encounter medical professionals who have never heard of FPIES. So if you notice towards the bottom, and again, this is a small image, but this is in your packet of downloads, so you can, look at it a little bit closer, but we have the diagnostic code for FPIES written here and just a really brief description of what FPIES is and what the medical professional would need to know in the event of a reaction. Then we have the customizable areas above that where the child's trigger foods can be written. There's a spot for their primary specialist or physician to put comments if there's anything specific they want the emergency staff to know. There's also contact information on there. And there's also a spot where you as the child's teacher or daycare provider can just jot down a few notes about what is happening now, what is current to the emergency you are going to the emergency room for, just to give the doctor a little bit of background about what's happening and where to go next. So again, you can find these documents in the packet that accompanies this webinar, but also you can find them on our website, just as all of our resources are. And this specific one and other emergency resources are actually on the emergency page on our website, which is fpiesfoundation.org/emergency-care/. In the event of a reaction, of course, we hope that that does not happen, in general, and also when the child's under your care, but reactions do happen and it's helpful to be prepared. So what do you do if an acute reaction occurs? We want to follow the child's ER plan first and foremost. And again, you will have already worked that out in advance with the family, and this should be in a very easily accessible place in the classroom, as well as any administrative files that you have for your building. The second step is to call 911 and be prepared to provide FPIES information to the EMTs. Again, they may not know what FPIES is, and the better prepared you are with FPIES information in advance, the better you'll be able to relay that information to the EMTs. The next step is to have a knowledgeable staff member accompany the child to the ER with the child's emergency plan, guardian contact information, and the child's doctor's contact information. That ER physician may need to contact the child's specialist or doctor who usually sees them for their FPIES care. And of course, you want to contact the child's guardians. Finally, have a staff member document the following areas: the suspected food trigger, if it can be identified, the time the symptoms began, what the symptoms were, and how they progressed, and all foods that the child consumed while in your care. Now, as we mentioned before, there are two ways that FPIES reactions can occur. There are the acute reactions and there are chronic reactions. So let's take a look at what to do in the event of a chronic reaction. Again, you're going to follow the child's action plan first and foremost. So that's already going to be written out, easily available to your staff and any of the administration that needs to help out. You're going to call the child's guardians to let them know what's going on. And it's important to take into account that missing school or staying at home from daycare or school, it may really be necessary, depending on how the child is doing. Determining how to handle a chronic reaction, again, it's a conversation that needs to occur with guardians, ideally before the child enters your care or after the initial FPIES diagnosis occurs. So not only do we want to plan ahead for those acute reactions that require emergency care, we also want to plan ahead for any kind of chronic reactions that are going to interrupt and impact the child's daily life. And just like with the acute reactions, you're going to, again, have a staff member document the suspected food trigger, if you can identify it, the time symptoms began, times are really important, what the symptoms were and how they progressed, and all the foods that the child consumed while in your care. So now that we've talked about how to identify FPIES reactions, what to do in the event of reaction, and of course, very importantly, ways that we can help prevent them, we need to look into talking about FPIES. How do we convey this information? As you all know, making sure that all the staff and parents and families, making sure that everyone's on the same page regarding any of your school policies is really essential in order to make things work well. So same way with FPIES, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody has the information that they need so that all the children can have happy, healthy days moving forward. So let's talk about talking about FPIES with school staff. Again, FPIES is rare, so it's not likely that most of your staff members are familiar with this diagnosis. That's okay. Use printable tools, such as the community awareness cards, to start the conversation. We do have materials available in English, French, and Spanish. All you have to do is download them from our website, or you can reach out to us and we're happy to send you hard copies. When you're having these conversations, you want to focus on safety and you want to focus on practicalities. It's important to know what you are not supposed to do, but it's also important to know what you can do. You want to create safety plans that are easily accessible to all staff and are regularly reviewed to ensure understanding by all staff. When you're having your conversation with staff members, you may want to practice writing out a safety plan or practice reading a safety plan, or even you could rehearse how you would act on a safety plan, act out what you would do in the emergency situation. We practice fire drills, we practice lockdown drills, so many different things, because having that practice can help us to do better when those situations occur. And it's the same way with a medical emergency. So really having a solid grasp on what to do, when to do it, who's responsible for what roles, and also where to find the information that's needed. It would be horrible to have an emergency situation and have somebody not know where to get the information to start the process. And finally, discuss and plan ways to talk to families and children about precautions. Having these conversations planned out in advance can really help to avoid awkwardness and to know what to say and what not to say, because we do want to protect everybody's privacy. One of the resources that we developed with the FPIES Foundation is this worksheet about raising FPIES awareness in schools. So again, this is part of your packet, and we talk a little bit about raising awareness with teachers and staff, how teachers can help to raise awareness in the classroom, and how we can all work together with families and the school community to build a more inclusive school community and to really help everybody be supportive and understand the needs of the child affected by FPIES. And as we talked about before, it is important to talk about FPIES with other families, keeping in mind that the goal of this conversation is to help them have a better understanding and not necessarily to satisfy some nosy questions that may or may not come up when other families are asking about the allergy situation in the classroom. So again, privacy is important, but you may also need to inform other families about safety plans related to FPIES. You do not identify affected children to other families, but do identify the safety precautions that your staff will take. So you may want to discuss hand washing routines and schedules, especially if you are having families wash their child's hands before they enter the classroom. You're going to discuss restrictions on materials brought in for special events, like parties or celebrations. And you're going to discuss restrictions on use of specific areas for eating. If parents can have these conversations with their kids at home, and you are having these conversations with their kids at school, it can really help to reinforce those routines that we're trying to put in place for all the kids' safety. And finally, emergency planning. You're going to want to detail ways that affect the entire class. It's important for families to have a heads up about what's going on. They don't need to know all the details, but they need to have an idea of, what could potentially happen. And most importantly, it's key to know how you want to discuss FPIES with children. Of course, this is going to be very specific to the age and stage of the kids in your classroom. And if you are working with infants, there's really not going to be a sit-down discussion. But you may want to talk about language that you use in terms of FPIES, because even as you're cleaning surfaces or helping babies wash their hands, we usually do describe what we're doing when we're working with infants. So, talking about safety concerns is the same, but again, very, very concrete, simplistic language. So with older toddlers and preschool age children, simple is best. Some examples of statements you might use. We wash our hands after eating to keep our friends safe. Some foods can make our friends sick. We do not share food so we can keep everyone safe. We want to keep our routines consistent and simple. Kids learn and accept routines when they see adults practicing the same routines in very matter-of-fact ways. Another key is to focus on safe versus unsafe. We do this with other areas of child development, like teaching kids to look both ways when they cross the street, or, talking about stranger danger. It's the same with FPIES and food allergies. We can focus on safe versus unsafe, and it helps to keep things concrete for kids to understand. And of course, you want to use kid-friendly supports to help reinforce routines and behaviors. There's some really great books out there, like Mangoes for Max. It's a really cute rhyming book. Wilfred Cannot Eat Dandelions. And that one in particular is a great one because it looks at GI reactions in terms of food allergies. So there's a lot of similarities between what Wilfred experiences, Wilfred is a sheep, and what you might see in an FPIES reaction. So that's a pretty kid-friendly one. And also there is a Daniel Tiger book called Daniel Has an Allergy. It does deal more with IgE allergies, but there is a lot to be learned from this book that really is applicable to FPIES and IgE allergies, like how we keep ourselves safe when we have a food allergy. In addition, there are some resources on the kids pages on our website that help you to get some conversation starters and to give you a little bit more information that is kid-friendly. We were also very lucky to have the author of Wilfred Cannot Eat Dandelions prepare a short video for us of her reading that book to children. So it's a good one. You can actually watch it on our YouTube channel if you have that capacity in your classroom or in your daycare room. And then the kids can follow along with the book if you order the book in your classroom. And all the books that I mentioned are available on Amazon, but I'm sure they're available in other locations as well. So finally, let's take a look at some tips to remember. Again, all children affected by FPIES are different. Trigger foods may differ from one child to the next. Reaction severity can vary from child to child and from food to food. With my daughters, some foods can make them very sick, and I know we will be going to the emergency room immediately. Whereas other foods, they certainly do not feel well, but we can manage the reactions at home. The other thing to mention is that reactions can change from exposure to exposure. They may not, but they can. So even though a child does have a history of a chronic reaction with one food, it doesn't mean that every exposure is going to produce a chronic reaction. Another exposure could produce an acute reaction. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're navigating the day-to-day with the children in your classroom affected by FPIES, and really rehearse in your head what an acute reaction looks like so that you're not blindsided if it does happen, even with exposure to a food that may have only produced mild reactions in the past. And finally, the child and his or her parents or guardians, they're really the best resources for teachers and staff to learn about each child's unique experiences with FPIES. The other thing that we want to address is it's really important to be on the lookout for non-physical responses to living with FPIES. So what do we mean by that? Bullying regarding food can occur, even among young children and sadly even coming from adults. So you really want to take a look at how these safety precautions are being addressed, how people are responding to them. If people are not really responding to them in the most graceful of ways, you want to take a look at how to address that, to head off any overt bullying that, is really counterproductive for everyone and can be really hurtful to children. Also, it's important to remember that reactions and experiences with bullying can cause anxiety and even trauma-like behaviors to occur in an affected child. So it's important when you do have those conversations, with the staff, to know how to identify these behaviors and what to do in case you do know these. Of course, you're going to talk to, parents and guardians and make sure you're on the same page so that they can be aware of what's going on. And, they may already be seeing these behaviors as well, and they may have a way of addressing them at home that could help you to navigate them in school as well. So again, keeping those communication lines open can really help. And then we have some tips from parents that were so helpful in sending us their words of wisdom. This parent says, just keep in mind that if teachers and supervisors are eating food, they should take turns. So there's always one person with hands that are washed and not contaminated with food, so that at least one adult is always available to help kids that need assistance without spreading allergens. As we all know, those who work with young children, they often need assistance, especially, opening containers on their lunches and things. And if we're all eating at the same table, family style, every time another child needs assistance, you're going to have to get up and wash your hands. So taking turns is really a great way to head that off and to make sure there's always someone available to help the children. And just to kind of piggyback on this, you also want to remember that, say you're helping Jimmy open his carton of milk, and then, maybe Sam needs help with his juice box, but Sam has an FPIES reaction to milk. You're obviously going to wash your hands in between helping Jimmy and helping Sam. So again, trying to avoid cross-contamination, just keeping that in mind. And I could give you slides upon slides of resources, but since I don't want to give you a ton of slides and overwhelm you, I just put some key resources here. And of course, there's some throughout our presentation. But our website is really full of different printables and different articles that can give you a little bit more insight into really any aspect of daily life with FPIES. So for school staff, the About FPIES, which I gave you the link to, is a great place to get started. It gives you a more in-depth description of what FPIES is. The online learning library is all slideshows and videos about various aspects of FPIES. It's really great. You want to check those out, and when you're cooking dinner at night or when you're just relaxing in the evening, these are really great to watch and expand your knowledge about FPIES. And of course, you can email us to request any print resources. We're happy to help you out. For families, we have awareness cards, of course, that we can send you to give to families. We have a special page on our website about school support for parents. We also have printable communication logs if your facility doesn't already utilize a document for that. And a great place to get started for anybody learning about FPIES on our website is the FPIES Toolbox, one of our first resources. And it kind of offers a roadmap for learning more about FPIES. There's so many different links on that page. So that is www.fpiesfoundation.org/resources. Check it out. It's a great place to start. And finally, for kids, they need resources too. So we have a special kids page on our website called A Foundation for Kids. We have a page on our website that is ways to cope for kids by kids. And we have another page that is school support for kids. So all the pages in our kids section are written to be read to or to be read by a child. So we want to keep it kid friendly and help kids be proactive and involved in their own day-to-day management of FPIES. We feel that it makes it a more empowering experience for them. And finally, we have I'm an FPIES Superhero awareness cards, which is an awareness card developed specifically for kids to give to anybody asking about what FPIES is. It really helps them to not be put on the spot and not have to remember everything about FPIES, but it helps them to answer any questions that they might encounter. And of course, like all of our resources, you can request copies of the Superhero awareness cards. So thank you so much for joining us today and every day that you visit our website to learn more about FPIES. We appreciate so much that you took the time to learn about our children affected by FPIES. So thank you for caring for them and helping them to grow and learn every day in a safe and nurturing environment. Again, please let us know of any way that we can help you as you develop routines and plans to better support the children in your care who are affected by FPIES. Please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us at contact@thefpiesfoundation.org. I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope you've learned a lot. Thanks so much.